A 2019 study broadcasting recorded human voices to wildlife across 6 continents found that animals fled from the sound of a calm human conversation nearly twice as often and much faster than they fled from the roars of lions. Let that sink in for a second. Not gunshots, not engines, just talking. For most of evolutionary history, an animal's fear was a precise, calculated thing. A gazelle doesn't panic at every rustle in the grass. It reads the specific shape of a predator, calculates the specific risk, and responds with a specific amount of caution, just enough to survive, not so much that it wastes the energy it needs to live. Fear, in the wild, is supposed to be efficient. It is not supposed to be absolute. And yet, somewhere in the last few thousand years, one species managed to override that entire calibration system in almost every animal on Earth, and that species is us. Researchers have a term for what we've become in the eyes of the animal kingdom, the super predator. Not because we are faster than a cheetah or stronger than a bear, but because of something colder and more devastating than raw physical power. We kill adult prey animals, the largest, strongest, most reproductively valuable individuals in a population, at rates that dwarf every other predator on the planet, often by a factor of 10 or more. A lion selects the young, the old, the sick, the ones nature has already begun to discard. We select the biggest antlers, the thickest fur, the fish that survived every other threat long enough to grow large. In evolutionary terms, we don't hunt like a predator. We hunt like an extinction event with a rifle. And animals know it. Not consciously, not the way a human understands a headline, but somewhere deep in the architecture of instinct, encoded across generations of loss. An entire ecosystem has learned to treat the human voice as the single most dangerous sound in the forest. Deer in areas with heavy hunting pressure will alter their sleeping patterns, becoming almost entirely nocturnal, just to avoid the hours when humans are active. Elephants in regions plagued by poaching have been observed to change their migratory routes for generations, passing down, mother to calf, an invisible map of where the danger lives. This isn't just fear. This is memory. This is trauma, encoded into behavior, and passed down like an oral history that no one ever had to speak aloud. But here's the question that should genuinely unsettle you. If fear like this is inherited, does that mean an animal born decades after the last hunter left an area is still, in some sense, running from a threat it has never personally faced? The answer, disturbingly, appears to be yes. Ecologists studying what's now called the landscape of fear have found that the psychological weight of human presence can outlast the humans themselves. Predator-free islands, places where no human has hunted in generations, still show animal populations exhibiting heightened vigilance behaviors that mirror hunted populations elsewhere. The fear becomes cultural. It becomes structural. It becomes something closer to a form of generational anxiety than a rational, individual response to an active threat. And if that's true, then what we are looking at isn't simply an animal being scared of a person standing in front of it. We are looking at the psychological residue of thousands of years of pressure, still rippling outward through ecosystems long after we've stopped applying the pressure directly. Now think about what that means for the animals that never even see us do the killing. Zebras and impalas in African reserves, when played recordings of human voices at a normal conversational volume, will bolt at rates comparable to, or exceeding, their response to actual lion vocalizations. These are creatures that have coexisted with apex predators for millions of years. Lions are not new. Lions are baked into their instincts at the deepest possible level. And still, our voice, just our voice, register as something worse. Why would that be? Partly, it's because of what we represent when we do attack. Overwhelming, near unavoidable lethality, often from a distance, often without warning, often without the physical cues a prey animal has evolved to read, like a predator's crouch or its charge. You cannot outrun a bullet. You cannot smell a scope. The entire toolkit an animal has developed over millions of years to detect and evade danger becomes useless against us. And on some level, their nervous systems seem to register that mismatch as something categorically worse than an ordinary predator. We are, in a very real sense, an unreadable threat. And unreadable threats provoke the deepest fear of all, in humans and animals alike. There's also the matter of scale. A lion hunts because it is hungry, and once it has eaten, the threat it poses temporarily disappears. Its danger is cyclical, tied to biological need, and in that sense, almost predictable. Our danger doesn't work that way. We kill for food, yes, but also for land, for territory, for reasons that have nothing to do with hunger at all. And an animal has no evolutionary framework for anticipating a predator whose motives extend beyond survival. From a purely behavioral standpoint, we are a threat that never fully rests, never fully retreats, and never gives a clear signal that the danger has passed. Some researchers argue that this is precisely why our presence generates such a disproportionate stress response. Not because we are always actively hunting, but because animals have no reliable way of knowing when we are not. Before we go further into just how far this fear reaches, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. Have you ever watched an animal, a bird in your backyard, a stray cat, a deer at the edge of the woods, freeze the moment it noticed you, even though you weren't doing anything at all? What do you think was going through its mind in that instant? I'll be reading through the responses, because I think the answer says as much about us as it does about them. Because here is where the story gets even stranger. It's not just the animals that are directly hunted who show this fear. Species that have never been targeted by humans in any meaningful way, animals with no history of persecution, still display measurable stress responses to human presence, sometimes almost as strong as those seen in heavily hunted species. Some researchers believe this points to something even deeper than learned behavior, an instinct so fundamental, so quickly and universally adopted across so many unrelated species that it may represent one of the fastest, most widespread behavioral shifts in the recorded history of animal evolution. We didn't just become a predator. In a geological eye blink, we became the reference point for what danger itself looks like. And this is where it becomes less a story about animals and more a mirror held up to us. Because the same nervous system wiring that makes a deer freeze at a twig snap is not so different from the wiring in your own brain that tightens your chest when a stranger's footsteps quicken behind you on an empty street. Fear, at its core, evolved for exactly the same purpose in us as it did in them: to keep something alive that could otherwise be destroyed. The difference is that we, as a species, have become so effective, so overwhelming, so unpredictable in our capacity for harm, that we've inherited the role every prey species dreads most. We are the shape that fear takes. There is something almost tragic in that. We often imagine ourselves as separate from nature, standing outside the food web, observing it, managing it, protecting it from a safe distance. But the animals don't see it that way, and maybe they never will. To them, we are not observers. We are the apex of every risk calculation, the variable that outweighs lions, outweighs starvation, outweighs almost every other threat they evolved to survive. And the saddest part may be this: unlike a lion, whose danger is at least honest, direct, and limited by hunger, our danger is often invisible until it's already too late, arriving from distances they cannot see, for reasons they cannot understand. So the next time you notice an animal go still at the sound of your voice, or bolt at the sight of you from 100 yards away, understand that you're not just witnessing a simple, momentary reaction. You're witnessing the accumulated psychological inheritance of a relationship thousands of years in the making, one written into instinct so deeply that it now operates almost entirely on its own, independent of whether you, personally, have ever posed any threat at all. If this kind of deep dive into the hidden psychology of the natural world is something you want more of, make sure you're subscribed, because there's a lot more of this waiting to be uncovered, and I'd hate for you to miss it.